sanctions before you were sworn in?
I don't know about it. I haven't seen it. What report is that? I haven't seen it.
Is reporting that he talked to the ambassador to Russia before you were inaugurated about sanctions, maybe trying
I
to...
haven't seen that. I'll look at that.
General Flynn does enjoy the full confidence of the president.
Jonathan Carl.
Back in January, the president said that nobody in his campaign had been in touch with the Russians. Now, today, can you still say definitively that nobody on the Trump campaign, not even General Flynn, had any contact with the Russians before the election?
My understanding is that what General Flynn has now expressed is that during the transition period, well, we were very clear that during the transition period, he did speak with the ambassador.
I'm talking about during the campaign.
I don't have any. There's nothing that would conclude me that anything different has changed with respect to that time period.
And why would the president, if he was notified 17 days ago that Flynn had misled the vice president, other officials here, and that he was a potential threat to blackmail by the Russians, why would he be kept on for almost 3 weeks?
Well, that assumes a lot of things that are not true. The president was informed of this. He asked the White House counsel to review the situation. The first matter was whether there was a legal issue. And we had to review that, whether there was a legal issue, which the White House counsel concluded there was not. As I stated in my comments, this was an act of trust. Whether or not he actually misled the vice president was the issue. And that was ultimately what led to the president asking for and accepting the resignation of General Flynn. That's it, pure and simple. It was a matter of trust. We went through a very deliberative process, a very thorough review. The first part of it was clearly to understand the legal aspect of this. And that was simply concluded there was no legal aspect. And then what happened is the president evaluated the trust aspect of it. Major.
When the president was asked on Air Force One on Friday rather,
Right.
traveling down to Mar-a-Lago, about reports, about conversations with the Russians, about sanctions, he said, "I don't know about it. I'll look into that."
Mm-hmm.
Was he being truthful?
No, what he was asked specifically is, was he aware of a Washington Post story? He hadn't seen that at the time. Of course he was involved. I just said that he was aware of the situation right after the White House counsel informed him back in January.
And his inquiry to the White House counsel was strictly about the legalities involved, not the propriety of the conversations between General Flynn and the Russian ambassador.
Well, initially, just to be
Any
clear,
criticism of the merits of those conversations about sanctions before the Trump administration had been inaugurated?
so just to be clear, the acting attorney general informed the White House counsel that they wanted to give, quote, a heads up to us on some comments that may have seemed in conflict with what he had sent the vice president out in particular. The White House counsel informed the president immediately. The president asked him to conduct a review of whether there was a legal situation there. That was immediately determined that there wasn't. That was what the president believed at the time from what he had been told, and he was proved to be correct. The issue, pure and simple, came down to a matter of trust. And the president concluded that he no longer had the trust of his national security advisor over.
It was proper for the incoming national security advisor, not part of an administration, to be discussing an issue as sensitive as sanctions with the
Look,
Russian ambassador.
I mean, his job is to discuss issues with his counterparts. I mean, Charles Krauthammer put it perfectly last night. That's what he's supposed to be doing. I mean, that's his job. We would constantly read out throughout the transition who he was speaking to, how he was getting ready. The president was receiving congratulatory calls from around the world. We would read out the world leader calls. The job of the incoming NSA is to sit down with the counterparts and start that dialogue, and that's exactly what he did. So the question wasn't did he do anything improper or illegal. It's the question of could he be trusted further, and that trust or the erosion of that trust was frankly the issue. So, hold on.
Did the president instruct him to talk about sanctions?
No, absolutely not. No. But no, and there's no, that's never.
So would you prefer he had not done that?
Well, I think the president had no problem with the fact that he acted in accord with what his job was supposed to be doing. He had the ability to talk about issues that were important, whether it was that or the 30 other countries that he spoke to. That was part of his job. as has been noted by many people, that's what the National Security Advisor and, frankly, other positions do. They begin the process of preparing their incoming job by talking to counterparts, people who have previously held the job, etc. If he had not done that, there would be questions as to whether he was properly prepared on day one.
Conversation about
No, the issue isn't whether or not what he discussed. There's been a complete legal review of that, and there's no issue with that. The issue is whether or not he failed to properly inform the vice president or not be honest with him or not remember it. But that's the plain and simple issue. And when he lost trust with the president, that's when the president asked for and received his resignation.
Thanks a lot, Sean. Yesterday, Kellyanne Conway, the counsel to the president, said that the president continued to have trust in General Flynn.
Right.
What happened between yesterday morning and yesterday evening that led the president to lose confidence in General Flynn?
Well, I'm not going to get into the specifics of where the president's thinking was, but I will just say, as I noted in the opening statement, that it was an evolving and eroding process. And so at the end of the day, the president made a decision, as he does on all subjects, and asked for and received the National Security Advisor's. But he is one of those people that we've noted before. When he's ready to make a decision, he makes it, whether it's hiring somebody or asking for someone's resignation. Once he is determined that he has made a decision on any subject, that's when he informs the staff. So going into the day, it was an evolving situation. He made a determination late in the day, and he executed on it. Yeah, Alexis.
Extremely loyal person, General Flynn. Was it a difficult decision for the president to let General Flynn go?
Well, sure. I mean, General Flynn is a dedicated public service. He's headed the DIA. He has been an outstanding member of the Army, both as an officer and then as a flag officer. He's served this country admirably. And I think the president appreciated his service to his nation, his commitment to his campaign, and his service to this country so far. But at some point, the decision came down on whether or not that trust had eroded. The important matters, as I mentioned, that are before the president when he's dealing with issues of world matters, of all of the issues, friends and allies, foes, hotspots. He needs to rely on a national security advisor to give him sage advice. And I think at a certain point, that guidance, that trust eroded, and the president, as he does on all matters, ultimately decides that when he's ready to make a decision, he executes. Alexis.
Questions. Does the president believe that anything that he discussed with General Flynn during the transition might have been construed by the general as a request or an encouragement to discuss sanctions with the Russian ambassador? That's question number one.
So then we're going to pause. So on the first, again, as I made clear, there's nothing that the general did that was a violation of any sort. He was well within his duties to discuss issues of common concern between the two countries. I will say it again. What this came down to is a matter of trust. The president was glad that he was out there conducting his job, preparing for his job, going back and forth with his counterparts throughout the world, much as the president had done, with all of these world leaders calling the president, congratulating him, looking to set up calls for him once he was inaugurated. Similarly, General Flynn was beginning that process with his counterparts throughout the world. That was never of a concern to the president from day one that he was briefed from the White House counsel. The issue, plain and simple, came down to a matter of trust, and once that occurred, it was over. So, I'm sorry. Yeah, no.
Just to clarify.
Yeah.
The president does not believe that any discussion that might have taken place, and we know from intel it did, on sanctions, creates a problem for the president in any way. That is not a problem. That General Flynn discussed sanctions with the Russians.
No, there is. As I can't state it clearly enough. There was nothing in what General Flynn did in terms of conducting himself that was an issue. What came down to, plain and simple, was him misleading the vice president and others and not having a firm grasp on his recollection of that. That's it.
Question number two. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill from both sides of the aisle would like to investigate or probe or ask more questions about this. Does the president hope to cooperate with those investigations? Would he instruct members of his staff who work for him here and in the administration to cooperate with those investigations?
Well, we're going to comply with the law. I think the president feels very confident. The review that was conducted by White House counsel was very thorough and concluded very conclusively, as he had first instinctively come to the conclusion that there was nothing wrong. So, people are free to do what they wish, but I think that they will find exactly what the president first believed and what the White House counsel concluded. And frankly, I believe a couple publications even reported that there was no investigation for a reason, because there was not an issue of law, it was an issue of trust. George.
When do you expect to have a replacement in place? And secondly, on another topic, there was a report yesterday that one of your colleagues said the White House is keeping dossiers on reporters.
Yeah.
Can you say if that's true or not?
That is absolutely not true. There are no dossiers being kept. Just a binder that I put right here. That's about it. That was a joke. Hold on one second. And then, I'm sorry, George, the first part.
The timetable on a replacement.
Just like the way he handled this situation, the president will meet with individuals, and when he's ready to make a decision and he feels as though the person is qualified and can properly advise him on the issue, he'll make that decision. But that's all, as all decisions, rest with John Roberts.
Let me come back to what you said at the beginning. You said the White House counsel's office reviewed this and determined that there was nothing illegal. What evidence did they look at in making this determination? And secondly, Democrats up on the Hill say that they want an investigation of this. They're looking into what did the president know and when did he know it. So can you tell us what evidence you looked at the White House counsel's office, and what did the president know about all of this, and when was he aware of it?
Well, as I mentioned, the first day that the Department of Justice made White House counsel available or sought to notify White House counsel was January 26th. The president was immediately informed of the situation. As I said, based on the information that was provided at the time, his view was that this was not a violation. He was proved instinctively correct. And White House counsel at that time undertook an extensive review, both of materials and questioning. I'm not going to get into the specifics. What I will tell you is on multiple occasions, they had an exhaustive and extensive questioning of General Flynn on several occasions based on information that was provided to them or materials that were provided to them to review. I'm not going to get into the details of that, but I will just say that there was an exhaustive review. And again, the thing that's important to note is the Vice President, myself, in fact, I think the first time I brought this issue up was January 13th. The Department of Justice didn't notify the White House or the White House counsel at that time in the transition phase until 13 days later. So I think it's important to understand something very, very important. This idea of why did it take so long, I think the first question should be, where was the Department of Justice in this? They were aware of this. We were making statements based on what General Flynn was telling us starting on January 13th. The Vice President went out on the 15th. Right? They didn't notify the White House counsel's office until January 26th. At that time, there was an immediate, the president was immediately informed of that and then asked the White House counsel to conduct a very, very thorough review. The first part of that review was focused on whether or not there was any legal issue. That's it. Once that became the issue, then it shifted into phase two, which is whether or not there was trust still maintained. And that issue, then that became a separate set of issues that were.
I'm speaking to the actual evidence. The FBI has transcripts of these intercepts, which I assume were done by the NSA via a FISA court order. Was there any communication between the White House counsel's office and the FBI? Did those transcripts ever enter into
I will say that obviously there was obviously communication between the Department of Justice and the White House counsel's office. I'm not going to get into the specific nature of that. I think it would be inappropriate because of the nature of the information that was being discussed. Yeah.
Why not dismiss the general on January 27th? Why, if the question was of trust, and immediately, you have January 15th, he's on Face the Nation saying that, Vice President Pence is on Face the Nation saying that this is what General Flynn told me, and then January 26th, you hear the opposite. Why not immediately act? Why wait another 2.5 weeks?
I don't understand how that's a due process. Because what the Attorney General didn't come in, and the acting Attorney General, come in and say that there was an issue. She said, we wanted to give you a heads up that there may be information. Okay, she could not confirm there was an investigation, and so it would be unbelievably short-sighted and wrong to go in and dismiss someone immediately. In fact, what the president did was take decisive action to make sure that the White House counsel thoroughly reviewed and vetted the situation. He took immediate decisive action. And if you look at the timeline in terms of what he did and how that expanded, the White House counsel's first and foremost goal was to make sure that there was not a legal issue at hand. Once that was concluded, then it became a phase of determining whether or not the general's action on this and a whole host of other issues undermined his trust in the president. But the president, from day one, from minute one, was unbelievably decisive in asking for and demanding that his White House counsel and their team review the situation, first and foremost to question whether it's a legal issue. And what they immediately determined, not immediately, but within several days, was that after review, that there was not a legal issue, and then it moved into a second phase. Mark.
Because Sean, the president tweeted this morning, the real story is leaks, illegal
leaks. It is leaks. But if you think about this, understand that all of this information was leaked. I mean, I got to, and again, I know we've got this, me lecturing you about what stories should be, but I think that there's a real story here. The idea that not just in this administration, but the Obama administration, going back to the Bush administration and back, that we have an issue where classified information, of which this would be, is handled in such a way that it is being given out. And I know in some cases it's a good story, and I understand that, and that's to some degree your responsibility to write that. But I think there's also a story here with the amount of leaks that are coming out of people that are entrusted with national security secrets and classified information are leaking it out. That's a real concern for this president, that when he's talking on the phone with a world leader, that when he's making key decisions that are in the interest of protecting this country, that we have to wonder whether or not people who work for our government, who are entrusted with classified information and decisional-based materials, are leaking that information out. That, I do believe, is a big story that should be reported. I also believe that the president is rightly so very, very concerned about this, because it's not just something that is plaguing, the current situation, but it goes back through the Obama administration, the Bush administration, the Clinton administration. When we have government employees that are entrusted with this and then leak it out, that undermines our national security, frankly. Trey. I'm sorry. I apologize, Mara.
I know you just forgot. I have a question, but I want you to clarify something you just said to John. Are you saying that no one has read the transcripts of the calls, or you just don't want to tell us whether they...
I have said that I'm not going to comment on it.
Okay. So my question is about sanctions. You were very specific in talking about the sanctions against Crimea, and that he doesn't want to lift them until Crimea is returned. But the sanctions that Flynn was discussing were the sanctions for the election hacking.
Right.
That's something the president could remove on his own if he wanted to. Is he committed to keeping those?
I think Secretary Mnuchin commented on that. There's no change in our current sanctions strategy or with Russia, and I've got nothing for you on that. Trey.
The current story is leaks. What is the president willing to do to investigate further to determine where these leaks are coming
again,
from?
I think this goes back to the same way he negotiates. Telling people what we're going to do to cover up additional leaks wouldn't be a very sound strategy when it comes to making sure that doesn't happen again. The president's been very clear when he's negotiating or dealing with an issue like this, you don't telegraph to people how you're going to handle it. Good. Hold on. Trey gets a follow-up. Everyone else got one.
So he is going to take some sort of steps to investigate these leaks?
I would just say that the president is, as I said, is clearly upset about this. He understands the threat that they pose to our national security, and he's going to make sure that he continues to take action to make sure that stops. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. So you mentioned time and time again that this is an issue of trust. You also said that it was an evolving issue, and that the issue of the trust that the president had for Flynn came down to this deception that happened with the vice president, but also a host of other issues. What were the other issues, and was the vice president the only person that was misled by Flynn? Were other people misled?
I mean, I think I've stood before you before and explained what General Flynn had conveyed to me. I think there were some others that had similarly expressed that to as well. So, you know, that's why it's others, because it wasn't just people who went out and made public pronouncements, that in a series of questioning that was rather exhaustive over a long period of time, he continued to maintain that had not occurred. And I think that's where the president continued to, and that's why the president was very clear that it was an eroding issue, because it was after a series of issues and a series of statements and pronouncements that the president came to that conclusion. Were
there other issues outside of this call and the deception over that led to the mistrust?
I think the statement's very clear that it was this and a series of issues. With that,
just a quick question. You said earlier in your comments that the president has been incredibly tough on Russia.
Mm-hmm.
How is that possible? He has made comment after comment over the course of the campaign, the transition, where he defended Vladimir Putin. He had an interview with Bill O'Reilly where when he was asked, if Vladimir Putin's a killer, he said, well, you know, America hasn't been that much better in this regard. Also, to me it seems, and I think to a lot of Americans it seems, that this president has not been tough on Russia. How can you say that?
Because I just walked through. I think there's a difference between the president wanting to have an understanding of how a good relationship with Russia can help us defeat ISIS and terrorism throughout the world. Look, the Obama administration tried to have a reset with Russia. They failed. They tried to tell Russia not to invade Crimea. They failed. This president understands that it's in America's national and economic interests to have a healthy relationship. If he has a great relationship with Putin and Russia, great. If he doesn't, then he'll continue on. But he's not going to just assume that because it wasn't able to happen in the past. I think you've seen with Prime Minister Abe in particular and others that the reset that Prime Minister Netanyahu has talked about tomorrow, so many of these countries from around the globe are looking forward to resetting the relationships that this country has with them, that they feel as though that they were abandoned over the last 8 years, and that they are excited about the prospect of a new U.S. relationship under a Trump administration. But with respect to Russia, I think the comments that Ambassador Haley made at the UN were extremely forceful and very clear that until they leave...
Haley, not the president.
She speaks for the president. I speak for the president. All of us in this administration, and so all of the actions and all of the words in this administration are behalf and at the direction of this president. So I don't think we could be any clearer on the president's commitment. Katie Pavlich.
Just a quick little follow-up, because I haven't had any follow-ups, but
really,
or questions in a while. But anyway, the other question is just getting back to what was asked a few moments ago about trust and being misled. Are you saying that the National Security Advisor was intentionally misleading the president, the vice president, yourself, when he made these comments to you?
The trust is given by the president. It's a relationship between he and any individual. And so, as I mentioned in the comments, maybe it was because, I don't know that it was intentional. He may have just forgotten. But I think at some point, trust isn't just a trust.
Forget though in a conversation.
But that's the point, Jim, is that at some point that trust eroded. To a point where the president did not feel comfortable with him serving in that position and asked for and received his resignation. Katie Pavlich.
On the trust issue and eroding of trust, last night in General Flynn's resignation letter, he said he inadvertently briefed the vice president-elect and others with incomplete information.
Right.
Considering his role in advising the president on national security matters, is the White House concerned that he maybe briefed the president-elect, vice president-elect with incomplete information on other matters of national security in addition to his phone calls with the Russian ambassador?
Well, when you look at the team, it's not one person in isolation, Katie. It's several. You've got, General Kelly on the Homeland Security front, General Mattis on the DOD front. He's got an entire national security staff and apparatus that briefs him. Director Pompeo at the CIA and others from the DNI's office that come in and brief him on a whole host of issues. So it's not a single position. Regardless of whether it's a single situation, it's not as though there's one person briefing him. And the president synthesizes a lot of information, both written and stuff that is briefed to him, and ultimately is he who makes that decision based a lot on what he already knows, what he is presented with. So the president gets information from a lot of people, generals, admirals, people in the military community, ambassadors, people in the State Department, an exhaustive team at the National Security Council, and then makes an ultimate decision based on that and what he already knows to be the case.
Sean. All right, so since you won't answer. Sean, you've been asked a couple times about these transcripts of calls.
Right.
Will the White House declassify those and release them?
Look, it is inappropriate for me to comment on those at this time. Right now, the focus is on some of the evolving issues that are that were going around the globe. As you know, let me answer the question. It is not an issue that has come up. I think the president right now is focused on replacing his national security advisor, making sure that he's presented with the best possible information to make these key decisions. But at this time, we also have got to be careful that we were not involving ourselves in a matter of national security. And the review, as I mentioned, was done, and then immediately last night when the president felt as though it was time for a decision, made it. That's where we are in this iteration of the process. If we have anything further for you, we will update you.
Did President Trump, or President-elect Trump at the time, know of General Flynn's discussion of the sanctions while he was NSC designate? And if not, when did he finally learn about them? And if so, why was he okay with that?
So no, he was not aware, as he's not back briefed on every conversation that his national security team has or other staffers. They were performing their duties as other people were in terms of getting up to speed, conveying with counterparts and previous members of their team. That being said, when he was made aware of it, once the White House counsel briefed him on concerns the Department of Justice had. And at that point, as I mentioned, what he asked and what he believed at the time and was confirmed by White House counsel was that there was no legal issue here. Discussing the issue didn't violate anything. It was appropriate in the normal course of action to discuss that. And he immediately asked the White House counsel to further confirm what his instincts were at the time. Thank you, guys. Have a great one. We've got to get ready for a bill signing. We've got a bill signing. Margaret gets a bill, a follow-up, but he's...
Is the administration undertaking any sort of effort, either cabinet-wide or like inside the shop, to make sure that everyone comes forward who had any communications with the Russians about sanctions or otherwise?
There is no other information. I mean, that as far as we are aware, that is an isolated incident that occurred. And again, the key point in this isn't that there were discussions. There was nothing wrong or inappropriate about those discussions. It purely came down to a matter of trust. That's it. Thank you, guys. I'll see you tomorrow. Happy Valentine's Day.